So welcome everybody to the last presentation session of this fantastic Congress. Following this session, there'll be a closing adjournment session with Annette Flanagin. So appropriately, this session is post-publication issues. We've moved from preprints through to post-publication issues and everything in between. And once the paper's published and all those issues have been resolved, that's really where all of our jobs end. So it's a fitting wrap-up the conference. Our first speaker is Anna Marusic, and the title of her talk is Analysis of Indexing Practices of Corrected and Republished Articles in MEDLINE, Web of Science, and Scopus.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to see so many people still at the third day of the conference, a great conference. And I would like at the beginning to acknowledge the contribution of my colleagues, Thea, who works at the research office at my medical school, and Anna Utrobicic, who is the head librarian at our Central Medical Library. The idea for this study came from the recent ICMJ revision, where in the section on corrections and versioning, there was another element introduced, which is a retraction with republication, which is a way of to correct honest but major errors which change the direction and the conclusions of the study, which can then be retracted but replaced with a good version, with hopefully with explanation of what happened. If you look at the fact sheets of the National Library of Medicine, they already have a provision for dealing with such articles. They have what is called corrected and republished articles, and then they are indexed. And what you see when you go to PubMed, you will see how it's presented. Slides are not moving, but for me it's moving. Okay, so this was the first slide, which was on our screen. So these are the definitions of the retraction and republication from the ICMJE, and the type of publication tag that is available in MEDLINE. So our aim was that we see how journals and different indexing databases deal with these things. How, when you have a retracted publication and you're replacing it, how you see it as an end user. What do you see when you come to the journal or any of these indexing databases? So the sample that we started with, we took 2015 and 2016, because those were the years where you would expect kind of pickup of the ICMJ change in the recommendations. So we took all corrected and republished articles indexed by MEDLINE. There were 29 of them. And then we looked at the journals, 3 databases, and also the crossmark to see how they linked and indexed the retracted and the republished articles. For example, when you go to PubMed, this is one of such articles, you will see that there is an erratum, that there is a notice published about what has happened, and also that this article was corrected and republished with a link to the article, and then it's going too fast. And then you see that it again links to the other articles. So we studied 29 journals. These 29 articles were published in 24 medical journals from different research areas. They were all indexed in Scopus, some of them not in the Web of Science, and you see the median impact, which was about 3. So when we looked at these characteristics, we saw that out of 29, corrected article as a separate articles was published in 25 cases. In 15 of them, so half, there was a separate item that told the reader what everything was about. And in 15 only, the correction was also indicated in the republished article. I have to be very careful with pressing this. When we looked at cross-mark information, we found it in 17 of them. And in 10 of them, this cross-mark notification linked to the correction notification or replaced article. So for us, it was really, for me personally, was a frustration that when you open a cross-mark tag, you don't see easily what has happened with this article. For example, this is a study from The Lancet. When you click on the cross-mark icon there, you just see document is current. It doesn't say it's current, it's a revised version or whatever, replaced version. You have to open the more information tag down there to see that there are other publications linked to it. This article, then the editorial linked to it, then the citing article, and only this one, and you have to copy each of these DOIs and look for them, it's a notice of replacement. So it's really not clear for the end user what's going on. When we looked at Web of Science and Scopus, we found that not all original articles were indexed, and when we looked at how the corrected articles was indexed, it was indexed as article, but not in all the cases. It was indexed as article or retracted publications in 2 cases in Web of Science. You had them as corrections, you had them as errata in Scopus. There were even editorial material, reprint review. So there was inconsistency in indexing these published items. When you looked at whether there are links, so we found only in 12 out of 27 in Web of Science and in 8 in Scopus that the corrected article links to the original articles. They also index rather consistently the items that indicated this correction, and also only in some of the cases this separate item indicated the correction and linked it to the original article. And when you look at the citations to the original and to the retracted and to the new replaced articles were the same in both the Web of Science and the Scopus. And then we have another case, because during the review process we were asked, are there any JAMA articles in there? And they were not indexed. Although the JAMA has published this type of article, they were not indexed as such in the NLM, but when we searched PubMed as retraction and replacement, not corrected and replaced, then we found 5 articles published in JAMA from 2014, but they were tagged only as retracted publication, not as corrected and republished, replaced articles. So Web of Science and Scopus indexed all of them, and they were kind of, again, a little bit inconsistently indexed. So for example, when you go to the PubMed and you look for one of these articles in the JAMA, you see that it is a retraction of, and that the publication type down there is retraction of publication. To the notice, and when you go to the actual article, which links from here, you see that it is a retracted article. Although you see in the table that there is a retraction, there is a notice of retraction and replacement, but for someone who is looking at here, they would just see a retracted article. Although when you go to the website of the journal, you see that this clear warning that this article has been retracted and replaced, and this is a notice which indicates, again, then links to the correct article. So the conclusion from our study seems to be that there is a large variation of how journals, indexing databases, and other publishing services like Crossref provide us with the information about these articles. So the user, when they come and search, they would get 3 identical articles. One of them would be retracted, one of them would be republished, and one would be a notice which may not be indexed as a notice, but it's something else. So obviously this diminishes the credibility and transparency of this important correction of literature, and our argument and advice that if we are going this way, then we have to really appropriately index, interlink, update, and amend these changes in literature. But I emphasize here appropriately, because what we have now is seemingly some connection and combinations, but not clear enough for the end user to understand what has happened with the article. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, and you are very timely, so we have lots of time for questions.
Really tall before. I'm Hilda Bastian from PubMed Commons. That was great. Thanks a lot. And that's going to be really helpful for us because we're going through a process of trying to identify all of these at PubMed, which is a slow, painful process. You were showing a whole lot of different ways that people deal with it. Did you have a kind of like a way that you would most prefer that it was shown? Was there sort of some example that you thought, this is a really good example, and I wish
Okay.
everybody did this.
I don't have any conflict in regard to what I'm going to say now, except that I'm editor of a journal that is indexed in MEDLINE, but I like the MEDLINE way. I think the NLM does it really well with interlinking. That obviously has to be the reason why the JAMA papers were not indexed. And also, of course, we didn't go into the DOIs things because, you know, some journals had the same DOI, some don't, and whether that makes a difference. I think we're really struggling in this field, and as a kind of publishing or editor person, I think that we still live in the paper age. That still we think in paper, and that we're not using what digital technology can offer us to really do what we want to do. You know, the transparency is really lagging behind in a way how we present information, both in journal and in indexing agency. I think that indexing agency and I was most surprised by Crossmark that I don't see right away that this is a correction from something. So I think all of these stakeholders need to get together and see the best way for the poor guy who goes to the web and searches indexes and sees all kinds of different information, and it confuses them, and you see it in citations, which may be because they cited the previous and then they cited a new one, but still I think it's important and serious confusion that is, at least now. Take this as a baseline and see how we can best work on the ICMJ recommendation.
Okay, there's a question there, Ivan.
Yeah, Ivan Oransky from Retraction Watch. So a plug quickly. We are, of course, gathering, as many of you know, our own database of retractions, which we hope will take advantage of your great work here. Retractiondatabase.org. It's available but not complete yet. I'm wondering if you know, the DOIs and the, do you sort of have a sense, not to put you on the spot, but of sort of best practice in terms of DOIs? Because we're struggling with that because we have two use cases where we really are not quite clear how to deal with it, to be honest. We have ideas, but one is articles that actually never had a DOI to begin with. And so obviously, if they didn't have a DOI, it's very unlikely that the retraction notice or the correction notice will have a DOI. And then, of course, there's where the journal just the publisher uses the same DOI, which we think adds to the confusion. And we're wondering if, you know.
Yeah, I really don't know. I'm as much not confused, but I don't know the solution because if it is replaced, so it was retracted and replaced, it is in a way logical to have the same DOI. Why, you know, punish the authors? Or maybe they would then have two articles, you know, they would count as two for them. And I know that some of the Lancet papers that we saw have the same DOIs. So I'm not quite sure. They know better, perhaps, you know, the providers of these services know better than we do, or maybe ICMJE can come with some kind of recommendation, or other, you know, people who have more experience. You know, I never did such a retraction and replacement in my journal, so I'm sure that they have experience for this. But maybe Annette there is the next in line for question.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, yes. Go ahead.
Okay. Annette Flanagin, JAMA and the JAMA Network. Thank you, Anna. Really important work that you did there. We've been in discussion with, and there are several NLM colleagues here in the room, about this idea of how to handle retraction and replacement, which is a new animal. So JAMA's called it retraction and replacement, Lancet has called it retraction and republication. And we feel it's really important when there is honest, inadvertent error to not stigmatize the authors and to give them a chance to have their art, and the science is still valid, to have their article retain its former metrics and continue in its path as part of the journey of the science being used and reused and maybe reproduced. So that's our thinking behind it, and that is why we keep one DOI for now. And I'm hoping that NLM will grow with us and find a way to deal with this new animal.
Yeah. I hope that people from Clarivate Analytics and also from Elsevier are here to hear this and maybe come together to discuss this. And I agree with you that it's really, it would be a shame to penalize the authors for something that we haven't dealt well with, because they, you know, they deserve to have a single publication and single metrics around it.
There's a question here.
Yes, Elizabeth Seaver from PLOS. Great talk, and I had 2 questions for you, sort of the technical aspects of this. So I've been thinking a lot about retractions and corrections in terms of text and data mining, but I know it also affects the end user. And so I'm wondering, first, what do you see as being sort of the ideal workflow or connections between things for where information lives about articles being corrected or retracted in the article itself as, you know, a relationship to another item? And secondly, how do you see article versioning as maybe fitting into this when articles are being sort of replaced in place?
Okay, I think, you know, the best thing is to go to the NLM fact sheet and read about article versioning. They have, I think, a good way of dealing with that. So I would say that article versioning is a different matter, especially for some of the PLOS journals. But here, I think what I've shown, both, you know, from the Lancet and from the JAMA and from other journals, keeping this retracted and replaced as one piece and having a notice and then linking together is what seems to be the best and what kind of NLM, in a way, although they very often have 2 publications. And we have seen cases where a journal has published a paper twice. So they say this one is not valid, you know, and they take you to the earlier version. So it can be a publisher's error, which is also covered in the NLM description of this corrected and republished article.
Thanks.
We have time for one more question.
Thanks. Matt Hodgkinson from Hindawi. There's a concept of inline correction as well. So where does the line get drawn between correcting something in line and retracting and republishing? Is there any actual practical difference, or is this just semantics? And also, do you sometimes have a delay between the retraction and the republication, or is it something that's simultaneous?
Well, who knows what the future brings us? Maybe we will have these heat prints and living documents. I don't know what will happen, but I understand that it could be that either there is a delay, which can either harm authors or create problems on how to cite it, and maybe there is a way that this can be done smoothly inline and online, so that there is a transition with some notification that is inline. So
thank you.
Let's try things.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Sorry, I have to leave for my plane, so I will have to say goodbye to you all. Great conference, and thank you, Drummond and Annette.
Our next speaker is Melissa Vaught, a cross-sectional study of commentators and commenting in PubMed 2014 to 2016, Who's Who in PubMed Commons.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for the honor of being able to talk to you at the Peer Review Congress today. I should also, of course, thank my co-authors who are here at the conference as well, Diana Jordan and Hilda Bastian. Now, it's important for me to disclose to you at this point that all 3 of us work at the National Center for Biotechnology Information, or NCBI, and that includes work on PubMed Commons, which is, of course, the topic of my presentation today. So if you're not familiar with PubMed Commons, this is a post-publication commenting venue within PubMed. So these comments posted here appear directly below abstracts in PubMed. This was launched in 2013 in response to interest from the scientific community. And a couple of key features that are important for PubMed Commons. One is that there are no anonymous comments or accounts or pseudonyms that are allowed. So essentially all of this is signed post-publication commenting. And then we do moderation after comments are posted. PubMed Commons membership is open to any author of a PubMed Index publication. And then in 2015, we introduced a mechanism for journal clubs to join PubMed Commons. So on this slide, on the left-hand side, this graph going from top to bottom is showing the accumulation of comments, publications with comments, and unique accounts posting comments since the inception of PubMed Commons. And the data that is summarized on the right-hand side of that screen is specifically or limited to the period of January 2014 to December 2016. And you can see that over that 3-year period, we've got about 4,400 publications with about 5,500 comments coming from a various number of accounts. and that there's really a big difference between commenting activities across accounts. So about 60% of individual accounts comment once and only once, whereas journal clubs, it's less than 20% that comment only once. In addition to those 5,500 active comments, there are an additional 268 comments which were removed by moderators during that 3-year period. And we also note that there was a similar number of comments which were deleted by users themselves. So last year we reported on a content analysis for a period of time with PubMed Commons, and we sort of assembled this synopsis of what we consider to be a typical comment within PubMed Commons. Down in the corner is the link for our OSF Open Science Framework, which you'll see again at the end, and you can find a copy of that poster there. But one of the key things about PubMed Commons is that it really seems to be a place that's to anchor contextual information or discussion, some of which may be happening elsewhere. And there's not a lot of back and forth between commenters that's happening on PubMed Commons. For the study that I'm talking about here, though, we wanted to get a better sense of who is commenting on PubMed Commons. And for this, we took a 6-month subset from July to December of 2016. So this is just to show you that the proportion of comments and publications is similar to what we would expect, similar to the distribution across that 3-year period. And in keeping with our previous analysis from another time period, we once again see that about 20% of the comments are contributed by authors. And so for this investigation, we reviewed the comments looking for evidence of multiple authors that would be contributing to comments. And we were actually, so on the previous slide, I told you about that we had these number of commenters on PubMed Commons. That's not entirely accurate because a lot of these comments, or number of comments, actually have multiple authors listed within the text of those comments. So we have about 21% of the comments with multiple authors. That is coming from 8 PubMed Commons journal clubs, and then there were 324 individual PubMed Commons accounts that were naming an additional 69 co-authors. We looked at the demographics for those individual members and additional co-authors. So we do not collect any demographic information when people sign up for PubMed Commons. So this was done through a mix of name matching for gender and then searching to resolve some ambiguous issues with gender and then searching for the commenter country as well. So we found that 21% of those commenters were women. But what was really interesting was to see that breakdown across the type of comments, where individual comments, 22% of those were being contributed to women, but women were named in 82% of the multi-author comments that were being posted. When we looked at the country for those same commenters, they were predominantly found in 5 primarily English-speaking countries, so that was more than 60% from those 5 countries. The largest proportion of commenters comes from the US at 36%, and then next was the UK at 16%. Together, commenters from Europe and North America were 85% of that commenting population. And then we also took a look at the comment text to see how often people disclosed conflicts of interest. And out of those 953 comments, we identified 23 disclosures. And often those were basically just notes to say, I have nothing to disclose, or I have no conflict of interest. So I've given you this really quick overview of some of the things that we've been looking at for PubMed Commons to really better understand its use. But we've really been considering a vast range of elements that might be important for evaluating PubMed Commons and that we think are relevant for evaluating post-publication commenting in general as well. So the most widely reported value, I would say, would be the total number of comments. But we feel that this really doesn't provide a clear picture of what's going on with post-publication commenting. In particular, we think that there are 3 additional factors to consider. One of those is moderation, so the number of comments that are being removed from post-publication commenting, as well as things like the unique number of records that are getting comments, as well as the unique number of contributors. And of course, what I've just shown you during my presentation is that you can't rely on the number of accounts that are commenting to give you that information, as some of these may be coming from multiple authors. And then of course things like the unique records, you also need to be thinking about what the denominator for that value is, how that's being distributed across disciplines. Another thing to think about is content analysis. This, of course, starts getting into work that requires significantly more effort than assessing some of these other factors. We have done a degree of content analysis for PubMed Commons. We have also been working on developing an assessment instrument to evaluate the implications of comments and other post-publication activities for publications. We also think, though, there's a limit to what we at PubMed Commons should be doing with regard to content analysis, given our own conflicts of interest here, particularly when it comes to things like the impact or the value of commenting. And our approach to some of this is trying to be transparent with our evaluations. So where possible, we're trying to publish our evaluations with open data. And then, as I mentioned, we do have a site on the Open Science Framework. There you'll be able to find a copy of our poster from the AAAS meeting last year. And then we will also be adding our slides from the Peer Review Congress to that. You can also find the other post-publication projects that PubMed Commons is working on. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Melissa. As people get to the microphones, yeah, I was going to ask a question about how you think about the world of comments on PubMed Commons in the context of all the other commenting platforms that are out there for every article, in terms of service to readers and how they might sort of collect all the post-publication comments that are coming together.
Yeah, so I think that there are a couple of things. One of the places where I think PubMed Commons fits in is that there are a lot of journals that don't have commenting features. And in fact, there have been journals that have been dropping their commenting features over the years. So that was part of the issue of being sure that there is a place where people would be able to comment and it would be somehow more directly connected with the publication than, than just sort of putting it up on a blog or Twitter or whatever that might be. I think we're kind of in the works of trying to get an API so that others would be able, if journals wanted to pull the comments from PubMed Commons into their own site, that would be something that was available to them.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so there's a question here at the mic.
Very interesting. Thank you, Mutaz Habal from Florida. One question in your content analysis, because I get comment as an editor all the time, and what percentage is productive and what percentage is counterproductive? Being an editor, you get both of them and you started realizing which one you pick. So can you comment on that?
So we have not evaluated that sort of element of the content analysis. We did sort of consider that, should we be evaluating which comments are substantive or productive? There are two challenges there. One is that the breadth of PubMed is, of course, so much larger than a single journal that having the expertise to understand which things are really productive or substantive comments becomes really difficult. And then the other aspect of that, again, is that conflict of interest for us of, we're not entirely sure if that's something we are really well positioned to evaluate or if that's something that the community should be taking on instead.
Any other questions? Yeah, okay, there's one here.
This may be very simplistic and I could see inherent problems with it, but it seems like it might be relatively easy to just contact the authors and ask them if they think the comments contributed anything to their overall publication.
Yeah, that's certainly something that we could consider for future direction. I think one of the challenges might be getting responses out of authors. So we do notify authors when comments are posted to their publications. But even with that notification, you see that we get an 8%, about 8% of our comments are replies from the authors. So the engagement there might be a bit of a challenge.
Okay, I'll ask one more question since we have time. And I probably should know this, and I don't. So for the comments, because you asked the question about how authors find them, but presumably also one of their main functions is for readers. Are the comments automatically visible to someone coming to the site, or do they have to click to see them? And if so, how many people actually can you see, or how many readers are actually seeing the comments that are posted?
Right, so the way that these are set up, the comments appear in PubMed Commons, is that if you click to read the abstract of an article, that comment will appear directly below the abstract, and so that will be visible to them immediately. And in the results, the summary results display of PubMed, there will also be a little note there that if there are any comments, it will tell you how many comments are on that. In terms of the number of people who are reading comments, we don't have a good way of measuring that because they are kind of tied into those PubMed records.
All right, thank you. If there's no other questions, we will move on. So the last speaker in this session is Mario Malichki, who is speaking on behalf of Liz Wager, who can't be here with us today, but hopefully is listening and watching on the live stream. The title of Mario's talk is The Role of PubPeer Comments in Alerting Editors to Serious Problems with Clinical Research Publications. Thank you.
Thank you. As you have heard, and as you can see, unfortunately, I'm not Liz Wager. This would have been an all-female panel as the one we started off, but unfortunately now stuck with me. And I'll try to do my best to present Liz's and Emma's work. Just a little disclaimer, I was not a part of this research. I've did my best that in the last 3 days I replicate most of it so that I feel confident giving this speech. But please, if there is maybe a question that I can't answer at the end, there will be a contact from Liz, and possibly she's even on Twitter watching this if she can right now from home, and we'll get through it. So Emma and Liz looked at post-publication comments in PubPeer. PubPeer is the other big database that allows post-publication commenting on articles. So it's not just, it incorporates all of the ones from PubMed Commons. Could I get the slides moving there as well? If it will work.
Can we get the slides advancing, please? Is there, yeah.
But it does allow, unlike PubMed Commons, it allows anonymous commenting. So while PubMed Commons only allows users who have registered or published a study, in PubPeer you can use a pseudonym or be completely anonymous. If you are familiar with PubPeer, you may have read it from Retraction Watch or some other database, because it has been previously used to correct literature, and because of it, because of some comments, some articles have been retracted, and recently developers of StatCheck have posted for more than 50,000 articles in psychology journals corrections where they found inconsistencies in p-values on those data. So it is a platform that allows a cross-field commenting. So the goal of their research was to look at how often comments of PubPeer actually identify serious misconduct or errors in articles, how often are journal editors alerted to these comments, and also do the authors respond to these comments. The 3 journals that Liz chose were BMC, BMJ, and Lancet, BMC Medicine, because they were familiar with the editors of those journals, so they could contact them and ask for explanations, and also because they wanted biomedical journals because of their own backgrounds, so that they are able to evaluate those comments when they do the content analysis themselves. They took 2-year period from end of 2013 till the end of 2016, so any comment that has been published for those 3 journals. And they classified the comments after, of course, looking through all of them based on the categories that you see here, where there's strong evidence of FFP, allegation of FFP, any other misconduct, be it a redundant publication or self-plagiarism, honest errors, praise, links to other comments, or other information, methodological errors, and so on. In total, they had, I'll come back to this. In total, they had 344 comments on these journals. So what I did the research, I wanted to see how much of that would be of all the journals. So this is 150 different articles. So in that sort of almost 3-year period, it was 70,000 articles that were published in these 3 journals. So this is a little bit less than 1% of comments on articles that have been published. Of those, 177 comments were related to almost 100 articles, while the others were on editorials, commentaries, and different issues. And as you can see, majority of the signed commentaries were from PubMed Commons, while the anonymous ones came directly from PubPeer. This is how these comments look like when you open them. So if you go to PubPeer, you can put in a DOI or search for a journal or search through an author and then see the comments that come out. And these are all comments belonging to one of the articles. So the first comment that you see on your right side is when someone actually linked that someone else noticed that there has been a comment published on this article. Then the second comment, completely to your right down, is when they say what could be the problem of this article. Now this is allegation of FFP because they point out in that image why they believe it is a manipulation of the image. Now I'm not specific to this field, but what they say is that the background cut the cells and this is not normal looking cells, so they believe that some kind of image manipulation occurred here. And then you can see the joking comments or comments on other blogs of people who have commented on other things. So it is a commenting sort of website like YouTube or somewhere else where people will just continue commenting on the same thing if they find it interesting, and not necessarily linking to that you can link whose all of the comments were. So you have 2 options in PubPeer. You can make all your comments be linked, but you can also log on each time anonymously, so it will seem that different people commented, even though it was one same individual. So of all the comments that they looked at, of the 177 that were related to these 100 articles, 2 articles could potentially be FFP. 2 were allegations of FFP. So the 2 that were FFP, one was the one I showed you where there was believed there was an image manipulation in the article. The other one was where a whistleblower posted that what was written in the article of the time that the data was collected could not be true because that was not the time that data collection occurred, so that the data that presented is most likely fabricated. The 2 weak evidences were of one figure looking strange but having no evidence that it actually is manipulated, but just being a little bit suspicious, and the other one of reusing that the same authors have several other retracted papers and that they use the same methodology, so that it's quite possible that this could also be a publication that needs to be looked at. That's why it's classified as allegation of FFP. The other misconduct were reuse of the same figures in the data without acknowledging them, and also not mentioning the conflict of interest of the authors of the paper that they were doing in. As you can see, the majority of actually the comments were linked to other comments on other websites and methodological issues of the articles. Now, if we try to put this in numbers, it would mean that on every 100 articles commented on, it is possible that up to 4 may have some problems and 2 additional may have less severe problems in them. Now, do bear in mind, as I said at the beginning, this is based only on less than 1% of commenting on all the articles that were published. So the real percentages would need to be maybe weighted. One thing to notice is that no editor was aware of the PubPeer comments. Now, PubPeer does not guarantee that they will notify, like PubMed comments. Their main goal is to notify the authors of the articles that someone has commented. But even so, only 5 authors replied to these comments. So of the 177 comments, only 5 authors replied back on what was happening. The journals, however, were aware, and this is why Liz chose the journals that she was working on, because she wrote the editors, and they were aware of all of these issues, even other issues that I haven't mentioned of the errors that were happening, but they came from different sources, and usually from whistleblowers or being alerted from other websites. So to conclude, although it is a very useful tool that someone can comment, we see that a lot of it is still done in a way that it may not reach the targeted audience. Now, unlike PubMed Commons, PubPeer comments are not visible on the actual articles, or they won't be in the PDFs or somewhere when you download the documents. And also, even that if they do alert to possible misconduct, there's no guarantee that no one will look at it. So 5 errors that have been reported, 4 have been corrected, but 1 is yet to be corrected of those that I've mentioned, and it's questionable if it will. Also, even though the editors were aware of this, it may seem that it is unlikely that editors have enough time or resources to look at comments also coming from different websites. And as you are aware, because these were 3 biomedical journals, we may not extrapolate this or generalize it to any other field, or even think that this is generalizable for the medical field. And we know that from PubPeer that commenting actually occurs much more on other article types than on clinical research that occurs. Now, Liz would like to take quite a few people. I will withdraw from pronouncing all the names because I don't want to do bad. Mine isn't easy to pronounce, let alone me trying to attempt the other ones. And again, I would like to mention that if I fail to answer any of your questions, please contact Liz for any additional explanations. Thank you.
Okay, if there are any questions, I will ask one as I see Theo is heading to the microphone. In terms of thinking about the value of raising a concern about a published paper on PubPeer versus to the journal directly, because as you said, some of the journals were not aware of the comments on PubPeer. I mean, what is the thinking around the value of that for the person raising the issue?
Well, I think we've heard it already before. Some journals do not allow us easy ways of commenting, and sometimes there's a limited window when they will allow you to publish really a letter or expression of concern. So direct contacting the institution, contacting the journal always comes back to when will you get the answer. And perhaps people in the online community believe that if you put it out there, someone has to take charge. Otherwise, it could be an email between you and the editors. And like peer review comments, are you allowed to share that email? Are you allowed to share the response of the editors? How long will that take? This way, you may skip a line and put it out there. And even if you were wrong, and in one of these cases, authors replied and said, no, you're wrong in this case. This was not a manipulation. We showed it with this. At least you get a quick answer back. But if only not even 5% of the authors respond, then I think we would wish that we could get journals to force the authors to do it. But all of those who are editors know that it's not always easy to get information back from the authors for studies that have been published a few years back. So this way, at least they're out there somewhere. And
I mean, you made a reference to sort of more basic science, and I can just say for Cell Press, for example, we will require an author to respond to any allegation that comes directly to us, but not necessarily one that's just posted on PubPeer. But if somebody, anonymous or not, emails us about a concern about something we published, we will always require the author respond to us.
In the last peer review conference, we presented a study when we looked at duplicate publications. Unfortunately, me as a third party who alerted editors, we got only 70% of editors back to reply to us of expressions of concern. So I'm not saying it isn't true, but it depends on the journalists who are doing it.
Theo,
So Theo Bloom, BMJ, and I'm one of the editors who was not aware of comments on PubPeer until Liz Wager wrote about it. But the BMJ has a very active rapid response system of commenting, and that's why all the issues had already been raised, dealt with, and discussed before we were aware of them on PubPeer. And I think the real issue is that PubPeer allows anonymity, and we mostly ask people to use their real names and won't just publish an allegation from someone who's not prepared to sort of say who they are. And I'm sort of interested because we've had a lot of this discussion at this meeting between open peer review versus blind, double blind, triple blind, masking of everyone from everyone else. I think there is a place for anonymous commenting, but if you're not willing to escalate that to the editor, to the journal, to PubMed Commons, or to any of the sort of mainstream places where these things are discussed, there's a problem at just saying, I'm going to stick it on a wall over here and hope someone notices. So I don't know if other people like to speak in favour of anonymous commenting, but it seems to me that, you know, there's a difficulty with expecting journals to monitor the world for possible comments on their papers.
Working at the university and being a part of the ethical board, and we struggled when we were making our own rules if we will allow any kind of whistleblowing that is anonymous within the university as well. Now, when you're a closed community, you want to allow it because everything should be investigated, but it allows slander and it allows raising of doubts that maybe really are unfounded at all. But I think it's always a balance of, so one of these cases was actually from a postdoc researcher who was a part of the team who is doing it. So in a way, I can understand why they may not necessarily want to say their name. In an ideal system, this would not matter, but in a realistic system, him getting a job from, or her from, you know, colleagues, or I think we know how it works. So I'm completely for open science, and I do sign all of my reviews now, if journals allow it, of course. But I would wish that it's all open, but I don't think we're there yet when it comes to society. It's not just this. I mean, you open Facebook comments, you open YouTube comments, people like to hide behind their opinions. They don't want to maybe go back 10 years because they were young and naive and said something wrong that it sort of haunts them forever. So.
Yeah.
Along those lines, I'm curious if these comments on PubPeer predate journal awareness of problems. In other words, even if the journals are not directly aware of the PubPeer comments, is it possible that they could, through some secondary mechanism, result in awareness?
So of the cases that they analyzed, the strong suspicions of FFP have always been raised before they came to PubPeer. However, the errors and methodological errors, and some of them which have been corrected, have been first addressed in PubPeer.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, with that then, we will wrap up this last presentation session. Thanks to all the speakers. And I will ask Annette to come up and turn the podium over to her.
So just a few housekeeping tips as we have for any session. I want to thank again our exhibitors. Hopefully you had a chance to visit with them. And special thanks to our very generous sponsors, all of whom you can see on the back side of your programs and also on the Peer Review Congress site. I would like to thank the teams of the organizers represented by JAMA, BMJ, and Metrics at Stanford. So JAMA, Howard Bauchner, who is running over there, Michael Berkowitz, BMJ, Fiona Godlee, Trish Groves, Theo Bloom, and the Metrics team led by John Ioannidis and Steve Goodman and their colleagues. Also wish to thank many, many, many people at JAMA and the AMA who have helped. They're all listed in the back of the program, but there are several people here in this room that I would like to thank personally. So if I call your name, if you would stand, and if you're standing hiding in the back, if you would kind of move over a little bit. So first, our social media wizards and producers, Eric Butkus and Emily Ling, here. Thank you. Ted Grzinski, our photographer, and there he is. Our meeting managers, Maria Ferrara and Wendy Carranza, and they're in the back here. And the epitome of efficiency and calmness, Connie Murphy Caroline Seatman, Jenny Reiling, and Rosa Miranda. Thank you so much. I want to thank all of you. It's really something that you're here. It's great staying power, staying to the end. Shortly after this meeting, later in this week, you'll be getting an email from us asking you to complete a survey. It's very important that you help us, give us your comments, good and bad. If you fail to do so, the ghost of Peer Review Congress past will visit you every night until you do. Just as a reminder, after we adjourn, there is a peer review week session here in this room at 5:30 on transparency and peer review, and we invite you to attend that. Okay, on to the tribute. So I'm delighted, I'm honored to be able to take this time to tribute Drummond Rennie with Fiona Godlee and Howard Bauchner. And I'm going to just start with something that, Drummond, I hope you will appreciate. It's my homage to you. Slide 1, please. Slide 2. There we are. Here's a ditty in tribute to Drummond Rennie, who's led the Peer Review Congress from the beginning. And in his announcement, quoting Franklin, Faraday, and Arago, and writing in his own poetic meter, Drummond says, "What do we have here? A terse American, a terser Briton, or a positively gushing Latin, or 3 scientists, 2 of whom are plagiarizing the 3rd? It is more likely that these 3 were merely stating the obvious, that as no one knows, research has occurred unless its results are published. Publication is central to the research enterprise." Before he announced the Peer Review Congress, Drummond was and always will be a doctor, a climber, and a scientist. A lover of furry creatures, all named Ben, mountains, and the environment. In the 70s, he went to a lesser journal in a dark region of New England, where he honed editorial skills and recalcitrance and saw his first case of fraud and cheating. There he also saw a statistical novelty, something called a meta-analysis. Thus began his love of journalology. And as deputy editor, he was an early adopter of advanced technology. Then Drummond saw the light and moved to JAMA in Chicago, where he edited, wrote, tested, and measured, and advocated for all that's right. He preached quality of reporting and exposure of bias, honesty for authors, credit for contributors, registration for trials, and transparency for science, and exposed crooks, rogues, and scientific fraudsters. He's been a leader of the tribe of Consort, founder and president of WWAMI, and president of CSE, a mentor, advisor, and collaborator with many, and a courageous liberator of researchers and editors from tyranny. For this and more, he was given the AAAS Award for Scientific Freedom and Responsibility. With the evidence-based trailblazers, leaders, colleagues, and those he admires, Drummond is one of the risk-takers, an early contributor to the EBM choirs. And at JAMA, he was a rainmaker, wrestling armfuls of manuscript files, nurturing the user's guide to the medical literature, launching the rational clinical examination, and recruiting and publishing practice-changing clinical trials. A dynamo at JAMA's manuscript meetings, Drummond made pronouncements of papers, authors, editors, and lesser beings, all the while appraising, amusing, and teaching. Many papers were, in his words, half-baked until revised, then fully baked. Other papers were appallingly long, obscure, convoluted, and dense, or complete hogwash of the purest essence. Agreeing with other editors only when his mood tilted benign, or when loudly crunching an apple, as another editor dared to describe a study's design. I recall Drummond once saying, with a smirk and a lilt, quote, "As an editor, I, of course, am a stranger to guilt." And my least favorite, and certainly not true, was Drummond to moi. Annette, you are as remorseless as an enema. Drummond first announced the first peer review congress in 1986 to place the practice of peer review under the same scrutiny and fix that it applies to science, and to expose weaknesses, threats, and bias. That first Congress was held in 1989 at the haunted Congress Hotel in Chicago, just down the block, for which Drummond received worthy praise and at least one complaint about the hotel's plumbing from the BMJ's Stephen Locke, to which Drummond replied, "I believe you have mistaken me for someone who gives a bleep." Since then, our Drummond has led us through 8 peer review congresses. Out of the desert of evidence-laced practice, he has urged us, cajoled us, and compelled us to conduct new research and submit new abstracts. We've met 5 times in Chicago, where the plumbing is now reliable. In 1997, we met in Prague, where the price of beer was undeniable. 2001, in Barcelona, during which the events of 9/11 kept us mindful, united, and unstoppable. 2009 in Vancouver, with the first research on sharing data that's reproducible. Yet every 4 years, Drummond and I worry, doubt, and obsess. Does anyone still care? Will they conduct research? Will they submit abstracts? And will they come to yet another Congress? Since 1989, 1,400 abstracts have been submitted and 763 presented, many from podium and many as posters. And always with equal time for audience discussion, provided there's no speeches, whining, or fussing. Thousands have attended the congresses, all of us together in one room, under the train-like schedule of Conductor Rennie, our peer review sage and boon. And we have gathered again here these 3 days to present and discuss problems, solutions, and innovation in peer review and scientific publication. We've been served by many, colleagues, staff, and friends, editors and researchers aplenty, and advisory board members again, many just like you and me, and some truly legendary. And all along, Drummond has been given support from JAMA and the BMJ editors, and now with the Metrics Team Edition, welcome collaborators in our alliance. And from all of us here in this room who temporarily set aside our role as competitors, supporting the Peer Review Congress and Drummond unwaveringly as we research, present, and debate the quality and credibility of science. But there's been none better and at the ready in support of Drummond Rennie than his wife and friend, Deb Rennie. Deb, thank you for sharing Drummond with us all these years. Drummond, this is the image I like to remember most when I think about you and the Peer Review Congress. It's actually from the last Peer Review Congress. There you are at the mic, sharing your experience, your insight, and your wit, provoking and inspiring us to get it right and to get on with it. Thank you for your vision and determination and all you have done for peer review, for scientific publication, for editors, for scientists, and for science. We are indebted to you.
There's more. There's more. There's more. You have to sit down.
It's the same tie and the... I live in Southern Oregon and I haven't worn a tie for 4 years.
Thank you very much, Annette. Thank you, Drummond. Yeah, so here's my tribute to Drummond. It's a challenge to be asked to say some words about someone whose talent with words is, in the words of my predecessor, Richard Smith, unequaled in the world of medical editors. Drummond is the medical editor's medical editor. Rigorous, exacting, insightful, courageous, passionate, funny, with a uniquely wonderful writing style and a huge frame of reference, widely read, widely and deeply connected across clinical medicine, science and beyond, emotionally and intellectually committed to the work of editing. It would be perfectly possible to use these skills and erudition to beat people up. Drummond hasn't done this, well, not often, and not unless they needed beating up. He has used his talents to lift us up, to make us think, and inspire us to better things. We've heard from Annette about the Congress, its beginnings, and its impact. This inclusive 4-yearly gathering of the clans can seem so solid and established that we forget what has been achieved in its making. We roll up and take our seats and wait to be entertained. But I found an email from a few years ago in which Drummond talked about the Congress as this fragile initiative. Drummond, with the exceptional and unwavering support of Annette and Deb, has fought to create and build this thing, to keep it safe and true, and keep it growing. And any one of us might think that fathering the peer review Congress was contribution enough, but not Drummond. He has given his unstinting support to other nascent organizations and movements. He was at the birth and has been godfather to what have become key pillars of the new knowledge culture in medicine, the evidence-based medicine movement, the Cochrane Collaboration, the World Association of Medical Editors, the Office of Research Integrity, with its crucial definition of fraud. And the years have seen him ceaselessly making connections, pulling people from across different disciplines, supporting young researchers, visiting the powerful in their power bases, cajoling, persuading, explaining, listening, forcing them to understand and take an interest, introducing contributorship, acting on conflicts of interest, fighting against research misconduct. You have to imagine the letters, the emails, the phone calls, the research articles, the editorials, the air miles, his voice, and usually his person somewhere over the mid-Atlantic. And he has done that rare thing, I believe, as he has got older. He has remained innovative and radical. The feminist Gloria Steinem has said, women get more radical with age because they lose power. Men gain power as they age, so they have more to lose and tend to get more conservative. This has not been true of Drummond. Nor has he been narrowly focused on medicine. At a time when he had a vast number of other commitments, as Annette has explained, he chose to take on the leadership of the Council of Science Editors, helping to make it fit for the future. And all the while, he has been a major intellectual force at a major international journal, championing the publication of methods papers that other journals weren't interested in taking. So it's easy to take all this for granted, that scientific integrity matters to people and always will, that we should evaluate and scrutinize ourselves to the same extent as we scrutinize others. It's easy to take these things for granted, but we mustn't. Just like we now realize we can't take for granted respect for science, women's rights, internationalism, the movement for social justice, nuclear disarmament, the progress of civilization. We've got to fight for these things and keep fighting. Keep explaining why they matter. Keep iterating, innovating, encouraging each other along the way. Like healthcare improvement, it requires what Atul Gawande has termed diligence. Better is possible, says Gawande. It does not take genius, it takes diligence. It takes moral clarity. Drummond has that shining through. And Drummond has been an encourager. Many of us here and others who are not here have been the beneficiaries of his wise, kind, careful advice at times of decision or difficulty. 30 years of mentoring, said David Mower. 25 years for me. And the comments of those I've asked are the same. He takes an intense and sincere interest. He gains obvious pleasure from the success of others. And disarmingly, he is not too grand to occasionally seek advice and support in return, which makes it easier to turn to him for help, and we can all learn from that. So, if leadership is about followership, Drummond is a true leader. Without being at the top of any organization as a chief executive or editor-in-chief, he has changed the way people think and behave, and enduringly, through them, he has changed the world. And for that, Drummond, we are all in your debt. So, before I hand over to Howard, I thought I would just do a little bit of crowdsourced tribute, and this will involve you all. Could I ask you each to work out how many peer review congresses you've been to, and be ready to stand up when your number comes and to stay standing. It's easy, I think you'll find. So, please stand up if you have been to all 8 congresses. Annette, oh, and Drummond. 4 of you. I think we give them a round of applause. Stay standing. No, you can stay standing. And then all of you who've been to 7. Deb is standing. You have to stand, I'm afraid. Sorry, George. Wonderful. George, you've got to stay standing. I'm sorry, this is the purpose of the... George, you've got to stay standing. 6. No, George, he doesn't follow instructions. Stay standing. Who's been to all 6 congresses? Who's been to all 5 congresses? Sorry, not all 5. Who's been to 4 congresses? Who's been to 3? Who's been to 2? And finally, for whom is this your first conference? And I think a round of applause to those for whom, because you're the future, the people who've just come to this one. So, stay standing. We are your family, and we salute you. Drummond, we salute you. Thank you very much indeed.
Dear, dear.
So I'm the last speaker. I will be brief. I think many people have extolled the virtues of Annette Flanagin. I have the privilege of working with her every day of the week. Some people tell me I'm her boss. I'm not exactly sure that that's true. But she is as extraordinary as the executive managing editor of JAMA and the JAMA Network as you've heard that she is today, and I just really want to thank her for all the work she does, both at JAMA as well as for the Peer Review Congress. I tried to think about how you summarize someone's 40-year career. It's been an extraordinary career. Interestingly enough, Drummond has never been an editor-in-chief of one of the major journals. But I think people's greatness is rarely measured in their own contributions. It's normally, or more powerfully measured in the people that they've worked with and mentored and collaborated with, because it's through the other people that I think great influence really occurs. So I wanted to read some names to you. Locke of BMJ, Ingelfinger of New England Journal of Medicine, Lundberg of JAMA, Relman of New England Journal of Medicine, DeAngelis of JAMA, Kazarier, New England Journal of Medicine, Altman, BMJ, Mower, BMJ, Smith, BMJ, Sachs, Annals of Internal Medicine, Suzanne and Robert Fletcher, Annals of Internal Medicine. Current editors, Drazen, New England Journal of Medicine, Horton, Lancet, Lane, Annals of Internal Medicine, Godlee of BMJ, and other assorted great giants of medical journalism over the last 6 or 7 decades. Sackett, Guyot, Zarin, Haynes, Chalmers, Ian and Tom, Cochrane, and Cook. There's one theme, one person that weaves his way through all of those individuals and all of the extraordinary accomplishments of those individuals. That individual is sitting to my left, and that is Drummond Rennie. I hope we could all stand and give him one last round of extraordinary applause.
I'm 95% gobsmacked. This is very touching and pretty unexpected because I didn't know about this until 2 days ago and would like to have stopped it, but thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much for these reviews, which I'll use for the next job I apply for. This Congress is about research, and I'll just tell you, I began editorial research when at the New England Journal in 79 and 80. John Baylor and Fred Mostella, the two nicest people in the known universe, came to the New England Journal where we published a series of articles on statistics. And I was asked my opinion, and I said, boring. Why don't you look at the best research articles, look at them all the way through the stages of revision, and then you'll have a book on all the major statistical problems and what should be done and what was done. And the nice thing was, for a few weeks, we had all these, or months, we had these Harvard postdocs, Walter Willett, Rebecca DeSimonian, and others, populating the place. And eventually we published, or the book was published, and we published all these articles. And the secret about it is, I just did absolutely nothing beyond that. But you'll see it there in the book. Bud Roman wrote about that. You tell others, that's the beauty of editing. You tell somebody to do something, they do it, and you go back to your hammock. Now, as I want to tell you 2 tips for the future and things we should investigate. Let's get on with something. And it's because of 2 things, indices, that those interested in peer review and publication should both, they've become very recently well-defined and established and purified and officially sanctified. They're linked, and both describe what, before 1986, editors wrote about peer review, or indeed anyone wrote about peer review, except 1 or 2 clear-thinking people like Stephen Locke. Both are why these congresses started, and think about that. In 2005, Professor Harry Frankfurt, professor of moral philosophy at Princeton, wrote a bestseller. This was on the New York Times bestseller list for 27 weeks. It was written to fully describe the theoretical, get a theoretical understanding of the word bullshit. Now, in this book, which is called On Bullshit, he describes it, and it's in dozens of languages. He describes it, and he says, bullshitters don't care about the truth. They have no regard for the truth at all. They just are trying to get someone to do something. Think about how much bullshit you read. The other is fake news, which in 2016, those 2 words together became the Oxford English Dictionary's word of the year, as I know you all know. Its incidence having soared 2,000%, a rise helped by the Brexit campaign in England and the US presidential campaign here. Authors of fake news make demonstrably false statements and persist in them despite incontrovertible evidence to the contrary. They may, of course, be liars, or they may just be bullshitters. I believe these 2 words apply to much of what we read and are worth your great attention. So there's a future research program for you young people, and it's so great to see all these young people here, and I include Howard. And good luck for the future. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
So with that, the Peer Review Congress is officially adjourned. Those of you attending the Peer Review Week panel on transparency and peer review, please come back here just before 5:30, whenever you want. And I would suggest filling up the front of the room so you'll be able to engage with what's going to be an excellent panel. Thank you.